Could this wind up being one of the best lead guard groups that Bill Self has ever had at the University of Kansas? We're going to break that down and what other teams might even compare, because Darren Peterson might be pretty good, in case you hadn't heard.
You are Locked On Jayhawks, your daily podcast on the Kansas Jayhawks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on? Derek Johnson here at D Johnson Radio on Twitter. This is Locked On Jayhawks, and thanks for making it your first listen every day. We're one day closer to the football season, one day closer to the basketball season, and thank you for making this your first listen every day. Thank you to everydayers catching each and every show, whether you find us on our YouTube page where you can like and subscribe to the show, or anywhere that you get your podcast. Thank you for joining us. On today's episode of the show, we're discussing how does this Kansas guard group, this lead guard group that Bill Self has assembled for the 25-26 roster, how does it compare to some of Bill Self's other bests? And is there a chance at the end of the day we could be looking back at this being one of the best guard groups that he has ever had? We're also going to kind of break down, as part of that, a lead guard position preview, going through what all the players bring to the table with Darren Peterson, on Marco Jackson, and so on and so forth with the KU basketball roster. Let's start right there, though, because it sounds a bit hyperbolic. In fact, it probably is, to say this is the best guard roster that Bill Self has ever assembled. He's had some pretty good guard rosters so far, but can it at least be in the discussion? And is there a pathway for it being the best? That's what I want to discuss here right off the bat. And I think in the preseason, it's much easier to do this because everything is based off potential and you're living in a world where everything's going to be great, right? And then we get to the season and it's like there's usually somebody who's going to disappoint. Could it be a guard? Could it be you never know, right? And it sounds ludicrous, and obviously preseason hype doesn't matter. It's performance-based, but hear me out for a second. If the bar, if the expectation, if the potential of Darren Peterson, some of the quotes that Bill Self has given over Darren Peterson have literally said, like, he is the best freshman I have ever recruited. This is a dude who coached Joel Embiid, who's won an MVP in the NBA, who coached Andrew Wiggins, who was the second-team All-American and a future NBA champion. And, he's coached all sorts of guys who have been one-and-dones. He's coached guys who have had great college careers. Like, I know he's not saying he's the best Kansas player we've ever had, but it at least shows he has the highest potential. And if the expectations are for Darren Peterson to have kind of a Cooper Flagg type of season, Cooper Flagg won National Player of the Year. If we're talking Darren Peterson, there's only been one player that Kansas has had under Bill Self that has won, swept the National Player of the Year awards. It was Frank Mason. If he can get onto that level, then it at least puts you in the discussion and say, okay, but if he's the best, because that's the thing. If Darren Peterson were to win National Player of the Year, he would literally go down as the best player in Bill Self's time at Kansas. Now, obviously, there's a different conversation in college basketball with best career, most accomplished versus individual singular season, right? But if we're talking about it from the perspective of if Darren Peterson were to go on and win National Player of the Year, he would be known as having the greatest individual singular season in KU basketball history. Again, taking out the team success, and we'll see how that would do. I would imagine if he won National Player of the Year, the team success would probably be there. But point being, the tiebreaker he would have over Frank Mason would be that, okay, but he's probably going to go on to NBA stardom as well, right? The potential there is just different. And so if we're talking about the potential of this kid is to have that type of season, which, again, it sounds ludicrous, and I hate to put that high of expectations, and I'm not saying that's the expectation. It's in the realm of possibility. Then you at least have to have this discussion, because if you're doing a draft, he would be the number one in that kind of way, right? From there, they have depth, right? You have Melvin Council, who, when I say depth, I think going to be a starter, but just depth in terms of having multiple players who can play this position. I think he could end up being an elite defender, could bring speed, transition play for KU. Marco Jackson, who could certainly break out in year 3 as a former McDonald's All-American for Kansas. And then the late addition of Ginyu Ngala, a 26-year-old who, at least provides some quickness, ball pressure, scoring if he has to come in at some point in time for KU. Now, to have this proper comparison, we have to bring up what are the other best guard groups at Kansas. And this isn't just an exercise to compare it. It's also to show you that when Bill Self has really good guard groups, the teams tend to be A, really fun, B, really good. okay, so these to me are I don't know if I want to say clear, but like, maybe I would say clear, like top 5 best. I'm just talking lead guard groups here for Kansas, right? So like, I'm not counting wing guards. Like, I'm not counting Wayne Selden into the group in 2015-16. I'm counting him as wing. I'm talking lead guards, guys who can like play the point. Darren Peterson went out of the game. Marco Jackson or Melvin Council could play the point. So I'm just counting the guys who can, kind of take over that. And to me, there's 5 teams that kind of, can go into this discussion. It's the obviously, and if you want to say it's the 06-07 team and the 07-08 team, because it's basically the same core of guys, I'm cool with that. But you have Mario Chalmers, Russell Robinson, Sharon Collins, that team or that little era. And then you have Roderick Stewart as kind of the Ginyu Ngala role, so to speak, for Kansas, although he might have been more in the rotation than Ngala will be. We'll wait and see. That one's going to be tough to beat, right? You're talking about a team that won a national championship. You're talking about a team that had a little bit of everything. 2010 is strong too. You have Sharon Collins and Tyshawn Taylor. I mean, that's 2 guys who collectively had 3 All-American seasons at Kansas. Not as much depth, though, at the point guard spot for that one, but that's a really strong one, too. I think 2016, 2017 is the this generation's gold standard, right? And not as much depth as well with Devontae Graham and Frank Mason. Like, who else is there behind it? Kind of similar to Sharon and Tyshawn, but, that is a gold standard there. If we are going to include Malik Newman, like, he's one of those guys where it's like, Malik Newman's not a wing. I don't know that I would call him a lead guard, but I guess you could. If you did, you would have that as a conversation, because then you would have Devontae Graham, Malik Newman. Same with LeGerald Vick. Like, do you consider he's not a lead guard? I don't know. LeGerald Vick might classify more as a wing. And then you have on that 2017-18 team, it's like with Marcus Garrett, he eventually finished his career as a point guard, but that first year in 17-18, he was used more as a wing. So like 17-18 team, you'd probably be looking at Devontae and Malik Newman. And then the 19-20 team, when Garrett was more of a point guard, you would have Marcus Garrett and Devon Dotson. That was Devon Dotson was second team All-American. Marcus Garrett was Defensive Player of the Year. So those are the 5 to me that really stick out in having this conversation. Again, we're just talking lead guards, right? I'm not counting, like, if you were to look at the 21-22 team, like Ochai Agbaji to me would count as a wing. He wouldn't count as a lead guard. So part of it is personal preference. What are you counting these guys as? But those are the 5. And to me, it really comes down to the 07-08 team. It's hard to be like, okay, if you're comparing 07-08 to 2010, you'd be like, oh, you have a better version of Sharon Collins in 2010, but, I'm taking Mario Chalmers and Rush Rob over just Tyshawn, right? I think Frank Mason and Devontae Graham, again, being kind of a gold standard, and then Dotson and Garrett. Like, those to me are the big 3. So I think if you're looking, for example, let's say the 07-08 core is your the one you want to compare to, or the 16-17 with Devontae and Frank compared to this team. The way that this guard group winds up being as good or better as those win a national championship, that would help. But no, it's from an individual player's perspective. Peterson wins National Player of the Year. That would put you on par with what Frank Mason did. And then obviously from an individual accolade perspective, the 07-08 team doesn't have the one guy. Like, it eventually had Sharon Collins be an All-American twice. But Mario Chalmers and Russ Robb were an All-Americans. Part of that was just that team was so loaded that everything was a little bit more balanced. But that one just has an incredible depth with those 3 guys. I think if Peterson wins National Player of the Year, and then you'd be looking at, okay, on the 16-17 squad, you had Frank Mason win National Player of the Year. Devontae Graham was still like I don't know if he actually won an award for it, but probably caliber of being like, because of the stats, impact-wise, was probably more impactful than this, but probably like a 3rd team All Big 12 type of guy, maybe a 2nd team, something like that. So that's where you got to go. Can Peterson win a National Player of the Year? Can one of Marco Jackson or Melvin Council, can they get it like an All Big 12 3rd team, All Big 12 honorable mention type season? Can the other one get like an All Big 12 defense type season, right? Let's say that Marco Jackson breaks out and can be an All Big 12 honorable mention pick, and he has a solid season. And then let's say Melvin Council is All Big 12 defense. So you're like, okay, that's the comparison to Russ Robb. Darren Peterson's better than any of Chalmers, Russ Robb, or Sharon Collins. I know that sounds crazy to say, but again, in this hypothetical, he won National Player of the Year. And then you can say, oh, Marco Jackson was, he was an All Big 12 honorable mention. That's similar to one of those guys. And then Ngala is similar to Roderick Stewart. That's how we get to that point in time. And those things are asking high expectations of all of those people. But like, it's not that crazy. The expectation on Peterson is to be one of the 5 or 10 best players in the country. So asking him to win National Player of the Year, it's not like that big of a stretch, right? Asking Marco Jackson to break out and be all Big 12 honorable mention, that's not that big of a stretch. Asking Melvin Council, who I think, might wind up being the best perimeter defender on Kansas, which could be one of the best defenses in the country, to be all Big 12 defensive team, like that's not asking too much. So I do think that they could very well wind up in this conversation by the end of the season. And as we go back and look at all those teams, 07-08 won the national title. 06-07, if you want to look at that same core, made the Elite Eight. 2009 to 2010 with Sherrod and Titron. Yeah, I lost in the second round in Northern Iowa. That sucked, but it was the best team in the country all year long. They were the number 1 overall seed. 2016, 2017, Elite Eight, right? 2017, 2018, Final Four. 2019, 2020, best team in the country. So I think once again, we kind of chalk this up into being like, hey, KU's going to have pretty good guard play this season. And I think that's going to make them pretty good under Bill Self. And I think some national people continue to kind of underrate where they're at. All right, let's specifically preview some of these individual players and how it all fits together, possible roles next. Today's episode of Locked On Jayhawks is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, and you can get in early on the KU basketball lines on FanDuel for the upcoming season. You want to bet an early future. Plus, summer sports are in full swing. Whether you're all about baseball under the lights, golf on the greens, or high-stakes soccer action, FanDuel is the best way to make every game even more exciting. You're already following the action. Why not make it a little more thrilling? With FanDuel, you can get in on the game while your friends are getting sunburned at the beach. And again, over at FanDuel, you can get early lines on the college basketball season. Who's going to win John Wooden Player of the Year? This is a fun one. Braden Smith's the favorite, 4-1. Darren Peterson's going off at plus 850. That's very enticing, but we don't want to say it too loud because we don't want the odds to drop too much. Also, Kansas is sitting at 20-1 to win the title. Might be a little light. You can bet on those at FanDuel, but do it responsibly. And if you're new to FanDuel, new customers can bet just $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. Open the FanDuel app today or visit FanDuel.com to get started. Thanks for joining us on this episode of Locked On Jayhawks. Again, don't forget you can check out Locked On College Football or Locked On College Basketball for your second listen every day. All right, so let's take a look at this lead guard position for KU. So the starters, Darren Peterson. He basically, it depends. How do you view Darren Peterson? Because, some people say, okay, you are what you're guarding. And on the defensive end, I think there's going to be times where Darren Peterson's guarding the other 2-man. I think there's going to be times where he's guarding the opposing 3-man. I think there's going to be times where maybe if Trey White's out of the game, like, is he guarding the opposing 4-man, right? Do you play basically a 4-guard lineup where on offense you're running 4 guards around 1, but Peterson's basically the 4 on defense? Like, that wouldn't shock me if that happened. But on the offensive end, I think he's going to be the primary initiator for KU. But he's 6'5", 195 pounds, 6'10" wingspan. These were his stats last year, obviously at the high school level. 30.4 points per game, 7.2 rebounds per game, 7.4 assists per game, 2.2 steals per game on 52% from the field, 86% at the foul line. So you look at his position and role on the team, like I said, kind of point guard on offense, the 3, a wing defender on defense. I think his role, unquestioned leader, best player on the team. Obviously, you expect that to play huge minutes. And we've seen Bill Self ride his guys, 34, especially the guards, 34, 35, 36 minutes per game. If all these players that we think could possibly play a role for KU end up performing at a high level, maybe you can keep Peterson down to 32 minutes. But if Bill Self doesn't trust those guys enough, then Peterson will end up playing, 36 minutes per game or something like that for KU. And I think when you look at the floor outcome, the ceiling outcome, I just want to talk ceiling and most likely here, but ceiling outcome, I think for him is the best player in the country and National Player of the Year, which you can get a plus 850 over at FanDuel. But the most likely outcome, it might be the ceiling one, honestly. The most likely actually might be that he is the best player in the country, right? And there's a world where he actually is the best player in the country and doesn't win National Player of the Year. Like, you see that sometimes, like, if Purdue ends up having the number 1 team in college basketball and Kansas is number 8, and it's like Braden Smith's putting up really good numbers. And it's like, realistically, are you taking Darren Peterson or Braden Smith's a fantastic player. I like Braden Smith, but it's like, and Darren Peterson could be putting up 18, 6, and 5. Braden Smith could be putting up 14 and 10. And it's like, but he's on the number 1 team in the country, and they're going to give it to Braden Smith. But like, I think the at the very least, like ceiling, you're talking top 10 player in the country. Andrew Wiggins was a second-team All-American, therefore top 10 player in the country, right? And to put a little less pressure and lower the insanely high bar that we've been talking today, like, let's say at least first team all Big 12, who's one of the 10 or 15 best players in the nation. But like, here's what I find interesting to raise the hype meter again, to get an idea, like statistically, what could it look like? Obviously, part of your statistics are going to be based on what other people do, specifically your points. If KU has a lot of other guys who are stepping up and scoring, Peterson might average a little bit more assists, and he might be able to, at certain times of the game, defer to average 15 or 16. But if Kansas doesn't have a lot of other go-to scoring options, maybe he does have to average closer to 20 points per game. But this is what I found interesting. Again, continuing with that Andrew Wiggins comparison as a former like big-time one and done. Wiggins for KU averaged 17.1 points, 5.9 rebounds per game. Those are obviously very good numbers. What did Wiggins do in high school? His last year of high school, 23.4 points per game, 11.2 rebounds per game, 2.5 assists per game, 2.6 block per game. Those are fantastic numbers for Andrew Wiggins. But if we go back to, if you remember me talking about Darren Peterson's high school numbers, Peterson averaged 30.4 points per game. Wiggins was at 23.4. That's a big jump in points per game. So theoretically, Peterson might be ready-made to be a better scorer. Now, Wiggins obviously better rebound numbers, but Peterson averaged 3 times the assists per game as Andrew Wiggins. And Peterson has better shooting percentages and stuff like that. So I think there's a real chance that Peterson gives you at least 18 points per game for Kansas this year. And like, is it possible he puts up 20 points and 4.5 assists, 4.5 rebounds per game? Like, I think that's very much entirely possible. And if those are the numbers, again, that's first team All-American National Player of the Year type stuff. Way to lower the bar, Derek. Okay. Melvin Council Jr. is another guy that I view as a probable starter at this point in time for KU. 6'4", 180 pounds. No idea what the wingspan is, but I'd imagine it's a plus wingspan. I don't know if it's, +5, but probably at least +2 or something. It seems like a lengthy kid. But last year, 37 minutes per game for Melvin Council. Bill Self loves that because, again, as we said earlier, if he doesn't feel like he can trust a lot of guys, and he does trust you, you will play a lot of minutes. He's going to feel like he can play Melvin Council a lot of minutes. 14.6 points per game, 5.4 rebounds, 4.1 assists, 2.1 steals on 43.5 from the floor, 30 from 3, 82 at the foul line. So I think his role on the team, at times, he's going to be playing the 1, the 2, and the 3, kind of all throughout there. The defensive stopper on the perimeter, somebody who can get steals, somebody who can cause chaos, get out and transition for you, push transition play, and honestly, somebody who can create another shot for you, right? He might not be the most efficient player in the world, but he can create his own shot, right? Like Cole Rosario is probably going to have a better effective field goal percentage than Melvin Council, but how often are you going to have Cole Rosario creating when there's 4 on the shot clock? Melvin Council might be in charge of doing that for KU a little bit more, and that's something I think he'll be able to do. I think the ceiling outcome for him is playing like 35 minutes per game. That trust level, the circle of trust, the trust tree with Bill Self, being the team's best perimeter defender. And I think the ceiling outcome probably also looks at him shooting like his career best from 3. Now, what would that realistically be? 33, 34%. But like we know, he's not somebody who's only taken 1 or 2 threes per game. So 33, 34% would actually be very adequate to get that done from the outside. I think the most likely outcome, maybe playing between 25 to 30 minutes per game, being a positive defender, being an extra ball handler, impacting the team in a positive way. Like maybe not a superstar, but it's also the mentality thing. We know that if you ain't a dog, you dog food type of thing, like being a fan favorite, those types of things. And I think maybe from a statistic output, like maybe it looks like something more like, I don't know, 7 to 10 points per game, 4 rebounds, 3 assists, 1.5 steals per game on similar shooting splits to last year, which would be certainly a nice season for him if he could do that. And then the last guy who I view as a starter is Marco Jackson, 6'3", 195 pounds, definitely a guy who I view as having a plus wingspan. Don't have it registered though. Again, did not play last year with the injury that he was out for the year. His year prior as a true freshman, 19 minutes per game, 4.3 points, 1.4 rebounds, 1.7 assists, 0.8 steals. He did that on 40.6% from the floor, 27% from 3, 77 at the foul line. Now, the free throw shooting suggests there is some good touch there. The three-point shooting, I think, is going to go up. It needs to go up, but how much is it going to go up? And that's where the ceiling outcome comes in. I think the role you look at him playing on the team, he's either going to be the first guard coming off the bench or he's going to be a starter. I think right now I have him in the starting category. I think he's somebody you view as being a strong defender, another extra ball handler. I think somebody who can score on drives. And I think the idea of Marco Jackson, too, is somebody who will be able to create his own shot, especially driving and using that athleticism to get to the rim. And so I do think the ceiling outcome, to me, mostly comes down to how much does the game slow down to him and how well is he shooting from 3-point range? Because I do think we've seen him be a good athlete and, be a really good defender on that end of the floor. So I think the most likely outcome, probably playing somewhere between 22 and 28 minutes per game, just depending on the variety of those things. But definitely having a big role on this team. And again, the hope is not only that he has a positive impact on this year's team, but also that he shows enough flashes that coming into the 26-27 season, when Darren Peterson's off as, in the NBA and stuff, that you feel like Elmarko could be a superstar that following year for KU. All right, one guy to get to in this lead guard group, Ginyu Ngala. What could his role possibly be, and what's the ceiling outcome next? Thanks for joining us on this episode of Locked On Jayhawks. Again, how does this KU guard group compare, and kind of a guard preview here. The last guy we have to get to is Ginyu Ngala. Now, maybe Elmarko Jackson or Melvin Council ends up coming off the bench if Jaden Dawson or Cole Rosario beats one of them out, whether it's at the beginning of the year or later into the season, or Bill Self decides later into the year, hey, we really need the shooting of Jaden Dawson or Cole Rosario. We're going to throw him into the starting lineup, so one of Elmarko or Council comes off the bench. But I think either way, those guys would be in a role and in the rotation. With Ginyu Ngala, I think it's more fighting for, are you going to be in the rotation? Is it going to be spot minutes, or are you not really going to be on the floor much at all? So he's 5'11", 180 pounds. Last year playing in Canada, 14.5 points per game, 4.4 rebounds, 3.1 assists, 1.3 steals on 40.5% from the floor, 38.3% from three, and 76.4% from the foul line. And so I think you look at the position and the role in the team. Somewhere between what Diggy Coit was last year for Kansas, which I think is on the higher end of the spot minute guys, slash Joe Yesufu. I kind of like that comparison for what he could do. And Yesufu was, somebody who was kind of fringe rotation as well. And somewhere between those guys, I guess Jalen Coleman lands as well. Somewhere between those guys at the higher end outcome, where you are kind of a fringe spot minute guy, to the lower end of the outcomes is, I think, Noah Shelby, the guy that you kind of came on to replace as a transfer, where Shelby wasn't really part of the rotation. But you are one of the team's better 3-point shooters, right? And so I think the ceiling outcome is he comes in and KU is like, hey, we are going to use this guy as like an 8th or 9th man. He provides some scoring spark off the bench. He can hit threes at a high level. He provides good ball pressure on the defensive end. He brings some veteran experience off the bench. Like, that's kind of the ceiling outcome for me here. I think the most likely outcome is that the 8th or 9th man are probably going to more like Cole Rosario, Samis Calderon, those types of guys. And he's more of a spot minute guy or playing in blowouts or at the end of games. But he, maybe has a couple games where he hits a couple threes for you that can help swing a game, or his veterans presence and his practice and scout team ability really help you from that level of things. That's kind of how I view it. But maybe you end up with more from him, and that would certainly be a positive from KU, because he is a good 3-point shooter and you need more of that on the floor. But overall, I really like this lead guard group for KU. How could you not? Because Darren Peterson is part of it, right? Now, if it didn't have Darren Peterson, you would be asking the question, okay, who's going to be, the guy here? But the beauty of having Darren Peterson is everything fits a little bit better, right? You might have questions. If Melvin Council was asked to be your star guard, you might be like, okay, is he going to be able to be efficient enough? But now in his specific role, because you have Darren Peterson, it's like, oh, I love, that type of mentality and that type of defense that he brings to the table. So overall, I feel like this guard position is an improvement from last year. It's definitely easy to say that right now, because hindsight 2020, looking back on what the guard position ended up being for KU last season. But when you have Darren Peterson, when you have that level talent, it doesn't feel crazy to say. It's not doing a lot of projecting on my end of things. It's like, yeah, it feels like that's going to kind of be the case. So really excited to see this guard group in action. Really the guys that you want to see the jump for. What is Melvin Council going to look like? What is Elmarko Jackson going to look like? And obviously you want to know, just how good Darren Peterson is going to be. Is he going to be the 12th best player in the country or the best player in the country? There is a range there, but either way, you feel like he's going to be really good. At the very least, this guard group is going to be better than it was maybe the last couple of years for KU. All right, that'll do it for this episode of Locked On Jayhawks. You can find our show anywhere you get your podcast, including on our YouTube page, where you can like and subscribe to the show. We'll see you tomorrow talking K-State and other KU opponents with an early preview for the KU football season. See you then.